The International Criminal Court's top prosecutor seeks arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. The United States has condemned the move against its ally, but will the ICC's action deepen Israel's international isolation for its war on Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Nearly 7 months of war, more than 35,000 Palestinians killed, and widespread destruction of the densely populated Gaza Strip. The International Criminal Court's top prosecutor says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The grounds cited by Karim Khan include starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, intentionally directing attacks against civilians, and willful killing. Khan has also applied for arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders for the October 7th attack on Israel. So what does this mean for the devastating war on Gaza, and how does legal pressure, first in the genocide case at the International Court of Justice and now at the ICC, impact the realities on the ground? We'll put that to our guests in a moment, but first a report from Kulsum Sharif.
President Joe Biden.
Standing by Israel, US President Joe Biden has strongly rejected the decision by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to seek arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. It's the first time the ICC has sought the arrest of a top US ally. ICC Prosecutor Karim Khan is also seeking the arrest of 3 Hamas leaders for the October 7th attack.
Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection.
The ICC prosecutor says there's evidence to show that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility for crimes in Gaza in the past 7 months. The Hamas attack on Israel killed about 1,200 people on October 7th. And Israel's war on Gaza since has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians.
The crimes include starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health or cruel treatment, willful killing or murder, and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, as well as crimes against humanity of extermination and or murder, persecution, and allegations of crimes of committing other inhumane acts.
Netanyahu condemned what he called an outrageous decision, accusing the ICC of anti-Semitism.
The prosecutor's absurd charges against me and Israel's defense minister are merely an attempt to deny Israel the basic right of self-defense. And I assure you of one thing, this attempt will utterly fail.
Hamas has also rejected the prosecutor's decision to seek arrest warrants against its leaders, accusing Karim Khan of trying to equate the victim with the executioner. The ICC decision has angered some Palestinians in Gaza.
We condemn the decision. Hamas in Gaza is a resistance. The resistance will never give up its land. Our land is occupied. We can't just leave it like that.
Israel and the US are not members of the ICC, which was formed in 2002. But Palestine is a member, and the court has the power to investigate war crimes committed on the territory of any of its member states. While a panel of judges at the ICC will consider the prosecutor's request for the arrest warrants, Israel faces further international isolation as it pursues its months-long relentless bombardment of Gaza. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining us here in Doha is Buttu, a Palestinian lawyer and legal analyst from London, We're joined by Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project and a former member of the official Israeli delegations to peace talks with the Palestinians at Taba and Oslo. And from Amsterdam, we're joined by Kate McIntosh, executive director of the University of California, Los Angeles Law School's Promise Institute for Human Rights Europe. She previously served at the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Welcome to you all. Kate, let's start with you. What's the significance of this move by the ICC from your perspective, having worked on the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda? Why did Karim Khan go public with his intention to seek these arrest warrants and not wait until they'd actually been issued?
Well, I think there are two possible reasons for that. One is that he's hoping to have an impact on what's happening on the ground. So he's released these arrest warrants with the hope that that will impact the conduct of hostilities or possibly the situation of the hostages. And the other is that he's hoping it's have an impact on the impression of the integrity of his institution. I think it's very important that he released these requests. I think it's important for those of us that care about accountability and international justice that we see that he was, to a certain extent, brave enough to take this step.
Kate, is it a foregone conclusion that these arrest warrants will be issued?
Almost. Of course, the pre-trial chamber, as I'm sure everyone knows by now, will be looking to see whether the material that's been submitted with the application does establish reasonable grounds to believe that the crimes have been committed. But it's very unlikely that the prosecutor would have not submitted adequate support for his request. He knows that all eyes will be on him. And it's a relatively low threshold that has to be met at this stage. He may even submit summaries of evidence. Essentially, the judges will just look at the elements of each crime alleged and see whether material has been submitted which would, if proved, support each element. So it's a relatively low threshold, and I think we can assume that it's very likely to be granted.
Diana, as a Palestinian lawyer, what strikes you about the way that these applications were made?
I think that there's a lot of both sidesism that is happening here. And while I'm definitely happy to see that Israeli leaders are being held to account, I think that there's both a question of both sidesism where they're doing both Hamas and the Israelis and to Israelis, as well as the list of charges, particularly against the Israelis. There have been so many issues that have been omitted. For example, torture is not one of the issues that is listed against Netanyahu and against Gallant, even though we've seen that more than 27 Palestinians have been killed in custody. And we have these videos as well as testimony of individuals who have been subjected to torture as well as those who have done the torturing. Where also that's been omitted is the issue of genocide as well. And so while this is definitely a good start, and it's fine, it's taken far too long to get to this point, I do think that he has engaged in a little bit of both sidesism. And
also, no mention of the occupation either.
No, there's definitely no context provided in this at all. So no mention of the occupation, no mention of anything that's happened before October of 2023. And as we know, this occupation has gone on for more than half a century. And the fact that they're simply hitting the start clock on October rather than the start clock, which is when Palestine actually signed on to the ICC, is very telling. And so it's lacking context, it's lacking depth. But again, I think it's very important because for all of these years, Israel has been able to get away with literally murder. And so the fact that we're finally seeing that one of these international institutions is beginning to hold Netanyahu and Gallant accountable is actually a good first start. I hope it continues beyond this, and I hope we see not just indictments, but much more than that, in order for this genocide to finally come to an end, for the world to finally stop Israel's genocide.
Daniel Levy, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think what we've seen thus far is, first of all, real reluctance on the part of the ICC to weigh in. As Diana said, there's other cases related to this space, related to previous assaults on Gaza related to Israel's crimes of settlement that are still pending. And despite that huge reluctance, here we are with the court making the recommendation for these arrest warrants. I think partly, and I think we should acknowledge this could be a knock-on effect from what we've already seen at the International Court of Justice, from South Africa bringing that case from what the justices called for in the provisional measures. But it's also a function of the daily, endless reality that we've seen come out of Gaza. And one of the things that I would point out is that Israel's friends and allies have been saying to it, you know what, we're trying to run cover for you. Why are you making this so difficult? At least let more of the humanitarian stuff in so you can't be under the microscope legally for the crime of forced starvation. And Israel has acted with the kind of hubris and arrogance that can only come with a level of impunity where they expect bullying to carry on working. And they're looking at this and saying, wait a minute, aren't the threats and the intimidation supposed to stop the ICC from doing this? Well, okay, maybe they didn't yesterday or the day before, but now this will kick in and we'll be fine. And why this is so important is that it's the challenge to that impunity. This doesn't change things overnight. There's no silver bullet. But when Israelis, initially not as a moral question, but as a question of pragmatism and efficacy, start asking the question, if the ICC can go after our leaders, if companies are now saying, should we make that investment in Tel Aviv or somewhere else? Are markets going to be more open to us? Are weapons going to keep flowing? Our research and development, university cooperation, is all that going to continue as if nothing has happened? And when the answer is that impunity is challenged and the cost-benefit equation looks different, then we might actually see a change. So I think the most important message coming out is for all those who are working to push impunity and accountability and to change that incentive structure, redouble your efforts because they are beginning to work.
Kate, to what extent are international law and the reputation of the legal bodies that are supposed to uphold it at stake here?
Oh, I think very much so. I think in this whole situation, I think going back to the ICJ provisional measures decision, which Daniel just referenced, I think there was a collective holding of breath before that decision as well, because there was an apprehension that the ICJ wouldn't be as impartial as I believe it's demonstrated itself to be, and wouldn't just apply the law and come out with the kind of decision it did. And I think there's been a similar feeling around the ICTY. I mean, we know about all the pressures that are brought to bear on these institutions and the geopolitical realities they're working in. And I think it's very important that they're seen to be, to some extent, I mean, as far as possible, impartial. That's what their entire legitimacy rests on. I'd like to come back on the two-sidesism point, if I may. I don't disagree with anything that was said, but I would like to point out that I think it would have been impossible for Karim Khan to issue indictments against only one party to this conflict. And in fact, the framework of international law, international humanitarian law in particular, the laws of war, is one which just regards parties to the conflict as, parties to the conflict, and any motivation for fighting is irrelevant in applying that law. So it has this levelling effect. So anyone who's fighting for whatever reason, the question of a just war or otherwise, whether advanced, whichever party it's advanced by, and of course it's been advanced by both in this case, is irrelevant. The point is, once you're in a conflict, you have to abide by these rules. So he has applied the rules. I would say he's chosen the offences that he is most sure of being able to get a conviction for. So I think he's probably followed the evidence. I think things like the denial of humanitarian assistance was such an obvious one. And the other one he's picked, of course, with regard to the Israeli forces, is the indiscriminate, or in fact the deliberate, targeting of civilians. And I think those are probably the two most easy to prove, and that's why he's gone in that direction. Genocide, as we know, is an extremely high threshold. very difficult, could tie him up for months and he might not be successful. We might see those charges coming down the line, but I think it's not surprising that he issued the charges he did issue against the Israeli authorities. I think similarly, the ones against the Hamas leaders are what we could have anticipated. And I think it would have been quite impossible for him to have proceeded against only one party.
Diana, Hamas demanded the withdrawal of the allegations, claiming that the ICC's prosecutor was equating the victim with the executioner. What do you make of that response? What will the people of Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories make of it?
Look, as Palestinians, we've been waiting for international institutions to kick in for as long as Israel has taken over our country and taken over our land. And we haven't yet seen that these international institutions do anything. So as Palestinians, we're always told that we must resort to the law, and we have many times, whether that was in 2004 at the ICJ, whether again before Israeli courts, which we've always been told we have to use, which are obviously not usable, to everything from now the ICC and so on. Palestinians have always put their faith in these international institutions, and yet it's these same international institutions that have actually failed Palestinians. And so this is why you're hearing the response that you're hearing. But on the issue of both sides, which I want to pick up on, is this wasn't just a question of putting labeling allegations against both sides, but it's a question of which of the issues were picked up on. When it came to Hamas, there were suddenly 8 allegations. When it came to Israel, only 7. And yet we have this evidence of what it is that Israel's been doing. They've made it blatantly obvious, and they've actually been projecting it for the past 280 days. So it's not that they've kept it secret. As Daniel said, they've been very loud and very proud about this genocide that they're committing. And even though the world has been telling Israel, calm it down, Israel feels emboldened to do whatever it is that it wants to do. And so now as Palestinians, we're saying, well, if these institutions actually mean anything, you are going to be the ones that are going to stop this genocide, because left to its own devices, Israel's not. It's going to continue to push on ahead because it's been given a green light by the world community.
Daniel, let's talk about reaction from the Israeli side then. Prime Minister Netanyahu said the charges are an attempt to deny Israel the basic right of self-defense, and that Khan is pouring gasoline on the fires of anti-Semitism that are raging across the world. How much of a blow to his administration was this?
Let's look at a couple of things. First of all, this appeal to the outside world is against us, my friends. This fits very comfortably with the cognitive, the mental map that Israelis have been encouraged to develop when it comes to how do you relate to something like this. So I think the initial response, and we've seen that, has been in Jewish Israeli Zionist circles, has been a unifying of the ranks. Some people will say, well, look what the court's gone and done. It's gone and helped Netanyahu, which is a silly thing to say because Netanyahu was not under threat of collapsing anytime soon. His coalition is stable, and it's not for the court to not make its decision based on that consideration, of course. So I think in Israel, you've seen people, first of all, come out against. And this is very important because it tells us that this is not just about Netanyahu. The guy who's touted to be the next leader of the Labour Party says, well, this is because our propaganda wasn't good enough. The leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, has said, well, if Bibi agrees to the Saudi-US normalization package, then The Hague will go away. All of this is nonsense. But it's important for that reason that as this slowly sinks in and as the knock-on effects sink in, Israelis will, over time, question this. And you have, of course, had a group of Jewish Israelis who have questioned, who've said we have to take this seriously. You, of course, have Palestinian citizens of Israel who've taken a different approach under very intimidating circumstances. Diana will know that better than anyone. And then when it comes to the actual conduct of this assault on Gaza and what it means, let's be clear. Israel is going into Rafah. We're hearing these same stories that, well, you know, we've done what the Americans said. We've got the people out of Rafah, but they've not gone to safety. They've gone to areas where they face further bombing, death, disease, starvation, insufferable human conditions, and crucially, it's almost ironic that these calls for arrest warrants are being issued against those two individuals, Netanyahu and Gallant, because if we cast our minds back only a week, they were at loggerheads. They were going at it against each other. Why? Because one was saying, hey, we gave you political cover, you didn't achieve the military victory. And the other was saying, the military did its bit, you didn't have a political plan. What is this really about? It's a blame game. When do blame games happen? They happen when there is failure, not only on the battlefield, but as we see now, legally, politically, morally, reputationally. And why is there failure? For many reasons. But one of them is that if your only alternative is to say, we're going to have a reset and push things back into a reality of apartheid and Bantustanization, then you have nothing to work with. And so this takes Israel's failings in this war to a whole new level, which of course does nothing to mitigate Palestinian suffering. But this ruling could lead to that, and it could impact the other case at the ICJ, the South African case, and the call for immediate cessation because of what's happening in Rafah.
Kate, do you want to come back on what Daniel was just saying there? I'd also, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the court has overstepped its authority here. Has it?
Certainly not. No, the court has not overstepped its authority. The prosecutor had authorization to carry out an investigation. With that authorization, he pursued the investigation. I think Diane has already voiced the perspective that he took too long. I mean, that's certainly a position that many people have held, but he has applied the law to the facts that he was able to uncover in his investigations, and he's issued the indictments. He has not overstepped his authority at all. I would say he's fulfilled his mandate. Okay,
what about the argument, Blinken's argument, that the Israeli legal system should have first been allowed the opportunity to proceed in a full and timely manner? Has Karim Khan rushed? You said, both you and Diana was pointing out that it's been too slow. Has he ignored the principles of complementarity, as Blinken argued?
Well, that is an important principle in the statute of the court, and it would be open to Netanyahu, Gallant, or Israel in general to ask for jurisdiction over those cases. And they would be able to claim that jurisdiction. That is to say that the ICC, the case would not be admissible. There's a formal process by which the chamber will look and see whether the case is admissible at a later stage. And one of the grounds for admissibility is that the case is not being prosecuted and investigated in a domestic court which has jurisdiction. So there is a mechanism for that. That application could be made, but it would have to be really demonstrated that these charges, or at least these acts, the same acts that formed the basis of these charges, were actually being properly investigated and prosecuted in Israel.
Diana, how much political pressure do you think the court's going to come under in the coming weeks and months? Can we expect sanctions, do you think, to be issued against judges and prosecutors at the ICC? I mean, a group of Republican senators in the US has already warned the court that if it goes after Israel, we will come after you. I mean, what do you make of that?
This is the U.S. flexing its muscle, and this isn't the first prosecutor that they have tried to strong-arm. And I don't think it'll be the last one either. So I fully expect that they're going to try to go after Karim Khan. I do, though, want to address the issue of using the Israeli courts. And it's important to note that Israel long ago passed a law that said that no cases that are inside Gaza can actually be tried inside Israeli courts, that the Israeli military has carte blanche to do whatever it wants. And we've seen this not just in the Gaza Strip, where we've seen aggression after aggression, attack after attack, where Israel has not at all been held to account within their own legal system. But we also see it when it comes to soldiers that are given a free hand in the West Bank. If you look at the statistics, that there is effectively no mechanism by which to charge soldiers with any crimes and in which to prosecute anybody. For example, we have your colleague, the killing of your colleague 2 2 years ago, Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered as she was covering Israel's action in Jenin. And to this date, the family still doesn't even know the name of the soldier who killed her, and nobody has been held to account. So there is no system by which Israel can try itself. And so this is just yet another talking point that Blinken and others keep throwing out as though somehow to kick this out of the international legal system, because they know that what Israel's doing is fundamentally illegal under international law.
OK, I've got about 2 minutes left, Daniel, and I want to get another question into Kate. But Israeli politicians, of course, as you'd expect, have rallied around Netanyahu and Gallant. What about the Israeli public, though? How will ordinary Israelis feel about the fact that their prime minister is the first Western leader to have had an application for an arrest warrant at the ICC, and the fact that it could further isolate Israel for its war on Gaza?
Well, what we have seen is that Israelis have been treated to a very particular take on everything that has happened over the last months, and the Israeli media has an awful lot to answer for. So I don't think you're going to see a broad cross-section of that public take a different position. The question, therefore, is how will this be followed up, not inside Israel, but on the outside? And my one comment on that would be that if the West continues to run cover for Israel to provide those weapons, then don't expect change inside Israel. The real challenge here is, sure, you've got a camp in the West which proudly wears as a badge of pride that it is xenophobic. It wants to bring down the international institutional architecture of law, the UN, the ICC, the ICJ, to pursue an Islamophobic, the rest against the West agenda. I think they will fail. But the question to the supposedly liberal camp, which on a good day claims to care about international law and that institutional architecture and the criminal courts and the UN, what is their position? Are they willing to continue to pay the cost for running cover for Israel, which has gone through the roof exponentially, the inflation of that cost? The answer so far has been yes, and unless they change, they are going to collapse the whole thing around them in order to defend Israeli war crimes and apartheid. That's a terrible mistake.
Finally, Kate, about a minute left. What are the chances of us ever seeing those accused appearing before the International Criminal Court?
Oh, that's a difficult one to predict. I would have thought the chances of seeing the Hamas leaders were higher than of seeing the Israeli leaders, just because of the breadth of political support might be stronger. But, I mean, who knows? We have seen, when Milosevic was indicted at the ICTY, of course, he was not in the same position geopolitically as Netanyahu. But when Milosevic was indicted, it was not clear that he would ever appear before the Yugoslavia tribunal. He was also in power. He, was deposed, and he was eventually handed over. I mean, there were many factors behind that. But, never say never. Who knows what lies ahead for Netanyahu, Gallant, Sinwar, et al.
There we must end it. Many thanks indeed. Kate McIntosh, Daniel Levy and Diana Buttu. Thanks for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.